Hello and welcome to the sixth, the 11th understanding class live stream. Today we're dealing with chapter 6, occupations as micro classes. David Grusky and Kim Whedon's reconfiguration of class analysis. Let's go to the panel. Today we have the returning for a second session in succession, let it be said, is Bob. Bob, how's it going?
Hey, Tom, going great. Thank you so much for having me back.
Yes, all the way from Winnipeg. Am I right?
That's right. Paris of the Prairies.
Paris of the Prairies. I was looking at, like, when you said Winnipeg, I looked at the like Manitoba is the state or whatever, and I was looking at it. It's fucking enormous, man. And there's nearly nobody lives there.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, there probably are a bunch of Indigenous people that would take issue to that, but yeah, like it's the population density is very low. Almost everyone lives in the city of Winnipeg. Then there are a few like ethno-Christian fascist communities outside of Winnipeg that are a blast to live right next to. And then most of the province is like, yeah, the population density is very low. Although there's a lot of small communities, mostly Indigenous throughout the north. But yeah, it's kind of a weird place to be if you're used to living in a very large population center, as I was until very recently.
He laughed. Okay, right. Next we have all the way from Arizona, Sophie and Esri. How's it going?
Hey, damn, Winnipeg sounds like a hot Phoenix.
Yeah, well, Phoenix proper is probably more dense, but it's spread out. And also, living in Apache Junction, I know what it's like to live next to Christian ethno-fascists.
Yeah, and also
Indigenous people.
Right. Yeah. Well, anyway, doing pretty good. I'm glad to be doing this chapter. It's a good chapter.
I'm so fucking ready for Kim Weed and Wayne Gretzky talking about micro classes. Fucking go.
What's that guy who did like Buffy the Vampire Slayer?
Joss Whedon.
Yeah, Joss Whedon. Yeah.
Kim's Whedon. Marxist, or Josh Whedon's Marxist sister, Kim.
Yeah. Okay. Kim Whedon and David Gretzky, is it? The ice hockey player. Is that what we're getting?
Yeah, Wayne Gretzky, of course.
Basically.
Wayne Gretzky. Wayne.
Very, very important ice hockey player.
Legendary Canadian hockey player and political reactionary.
Is he?
Oh, is that right?
Well, yeah, a little bit. Like he's part of the he's part of like the kind of anti-communist, I think, Canadian Ukrainian community. So he was like a big supporter of like our last arch conservative premier. Though also apparently he makes a decent bottle of wine. So you win. So you win some, you lose some.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
Sports people just like skew so right wing. It's ridiculous. On average.
Yeah, it makes me think of Propaganda's song about reactionaries in hockey, because they all really like hockey, but they're a bunch of like anarchist punk rocker dudes.
Interesting. I'll never look at Wayne Gretzky's 3D hockey for the N64 the same way.
Yikes! Yeah, fucking burn your copy of Wayne Gretzky's ice hockey for the N64.
Yeah, burn it with fire, because that'll be good for you.
Cancelled.
I hope that information. Yeah. Like I hope that he is indeed a reactionary. I didn't just make that up.
I hope he's a bleeding fascist, just so that you're not exaggerating.
Yeah,
I hope that he listens to this show and immediately starts crying.
He's one of the 3 people on the live stream as we speak.
He's always in the chat.
Yeah, he's always like Mark's hug for 42069. You know, you would never tell.
Him.
That's him. Yeah.
No. I thought he was Oswald Spengler we had for a while. Is that not him?
Right. Yeah. Of course.
Yeah, that makes a little more sense, actually.
We had. Is there somebody in my mind, like when you see Dave Grusky? Like I'm thinking, like, is there some famous buddy? I'm sure that there is. Is somebody called Slutsky? Can we call him like? Is there a famous person called Slutsky? I don't know why I'm saying this, but
I mean,
there is,
maybe.
Isn't there?
Can we just call him Noam Grutsky?
I don't know. Let's see.
Let me
I'm
see.
looking up Slutsky. And
Slutsky.
there's Leonid Slutsky. He's a football coach from Moscow.
Eugene Slutsky was a Russian and Soviet mathematician. How about that?
All right,
Yeah.
Slutsky, a storied name.
Wait, Slutsky?
Slutsky, man.
Slutsky, what a great name.
It's
I would like that
Eastern
name.
European.
That's my name.
Yeah.
That's what they say
didn't
about
know
the
you were
Eastern Europe.
Eastern European.
I didn't know you were so racist, Esri. That's the Europeans.
you know I am. You know I am. I like to keep each of the European micronationalisms in their place.
I always joke that when I go to Europe, I'm going to have to be careful to not like be racist against Eastern Europeans because that actually matters there. Whereas here, it's like, you're just white, like fuck all you.
Well, then there would be a bunch of Western Europeans like, yeah, fuck those Poles.
And I'm just like, actually, fuck you.
No,
I mean, ultimately, the people I really hate are the British and the French. So
yeah, well, you'll get along with the Germans then.
The Germans hate themselves though, so that's fine.
So they should. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good Germans.
Good Germans
for
for doing our emotional labor for us.
Thank
you. Yeah. I don't have to hate them. They hate themselves.
So I don't have to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. There's probably some new venture capitalist business. We hate ourselves, so you don't have to. Somebody's going to pitch it soon. Get $1 billion. Right. So, okay.
So David Grusky won a joint award from the he won the Max Weber 2005 Max Weber Award from the American Sociological Association.
Kim Whedon was his doctoral student too.
Oh wow. Yeah, there it is. And if he was a joint winner in 2005, I kind of imagined it was probably with Kim Whedon, but I don't know. Let's see.
He won a joint. Nice.
Kim Whedon Kim Whedon is Canadian, and it is a she. I always I expected it to be like an American guy called Kim, but it's
like Kim Stanley Robinson or something.
Right? Yeah, she's professor of sociology at Cornell. She's big wheeze.
Kim Whedon looks kind of more important. She's got a longer Wikipedia file, so that's how you know.
That's it. Fuck.
Yeah.
She studies a lot of stuff on, let's see, income inequality, gender wage gap, and professions and academic majors and shit. All right, I got you.
Right, let's kick in. First, overall impressions of the chapter.
I kind of like the game metaphor the best in this chapter. I'm a gamer, and when you combined two things that I really like, games and communism, you got your games and my communism and your games, two great tastes that go together. I just love it. I mean, in all seriousness, I really enjoy the metaphor and how thinking of these different kinds of analysis at different levels. Big class is focusing on like what game you play.
Yeah, I like that. I like the game metaphor too, and I also really like that. I was only last a few weeks ago for the chapter on Michael Mann, and it was kept at such a high level of abstraction. And whereas this, I really enjoyed the little section at the end. Well, I guess we'll get a chance to talk about where Wright is sort of able to be like, okay, like here's how these sort of things would apply over these different kind of eras of capitalism or shifts in capitalism we've seen over the last several decades, and that's why it makes a certain amount of sense that the analysis of Grusky and Whedon would kind of seem more plausible. And that made it feel like nice and grounded, which I liked. Whereas I felt with the man thing, it felt like it wasn't like a straw man position, but the position was a little bit out there. And so it was very easy to dissemble without actually like explaining what would be the benefit of this in a particular context. Whereas I felt like he kind of got that here, which was interesting.
Yeah, I think it's solid stuff. I really like the metaphor as well. I'm going to completely concur with Sophie. I think it's an excellent way to think about things. It's extremely clarifying for people who are only kind of getting into like politics or Marx or radical politics to get it explained in such a simple way. Very very revealing. Okay.
Yeah, and as far as like the I know you heard from Sophia, but that's not actually me. There's like, how do I put this? The game metaphor and the kind of three-tiered class analysis that's presented here is in some way, I think, maybe even better than the one that's sort of built up over some of the various chapters because of the predictive nature of microclasses for explaining a bunch of stuff that Marxists have always wanted to explain by using some form of class position, which is, being determines consciousness. How people's life reflects how they think, right? And so if you can weave in a research program that is, a little bit successful at that with the broader, like, Marxist framework, that sounds powerful. That sounds like a powerful step towards something that Marxists have been trying to do for a long time. And then the game metaphor knits it together rather elegantly. And it is my go-to metaphor for trying to explain different types of maneuverings. And the last section of this, giving the sort of intellectual history, as Bob was pointing to, about why this like sort of mirrors the shrinking horizons of our time, but also how that zeroing in it could be a good thing when woven into a bigger framework.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, this is one of my favorite chapters in the book.
When you say it could be a good thing, what do you mean?
If you cleave off this, microclass analysis and actually dispense with all the macro classes and refuse to look at those, it behaves in an ideological way to sort of annihilate the big classes from your outlook and annihilate the essential critiques of property relations and capitalism. You know what I mean? And so there's an ideological function that Wright is aware of that he points to as being, something that is potentially negative about the framework. But Wright has this virtue-centric approach where he's not trying to be like, you pissant, look at this, you piece of shit. He's trying to see how maybe you can abstract that part that is useful, this microclass part, weave it into a greater framework so that you don't lose sight of, the big classes. Like, if anything, microclass would be an excellent foundation from which to scale upwards to think about class consciousness in a more granular way.
Yeah, there's this interesting connection here. Maybe we'll have a chance to just because, like, as I was reading it, what I kept kind of thinking of, and he mentions Bourdieu in the analysis and mentions, I think, kind of implies maybe if it was that Whedon and Grusky are kind of influenced by it, but it reminds me a lot, like the microclass analysis reminds me a lot of like a Bourdieuian like field theory, right? Like
Theory.
Yeah, like people always are interested in Bourdieu with like the cultural capital thing, but like I always think one of the most interesting things he has is like lesser known is like field theory, where he kind of posits like the distinction of like different kind of like professional fields as like the basis, that having like different rules of the game, different forms of cultural capital, different forms of accreditation, and then actually like really do powerfully determine the way actors within and between those fields act, right? So like the journalism field is different than the academic field, is different than the field of let's say academic economics, right? Or even to the extent to which like academic economics is different than academic sociology or something like that. It looks a lot like and there's a lot of struggles within fields to like set the agenda of the fields and who has power and so on, right? Like and they involve very specialized forms of consciousness and accreditation and cultural capital and so on, right? Like how you rise in journalism might not be how you rise in academia, for instance, right? And what makes you powerful within that field. And so like there's something about what Grusky and Whedon are doing in the way that Wright describes them that reminds me a little of that. And I've always found field theory kind of interesting. And so at least at a particular kind of level of abstraction or level of analysis or something. So I found that very interesting, like the way it's being described in this chapter.
Yeah, like that sounds interesting. Like Esri, getting to what you said there about using the understanding of microclasses for a kind of radical proposition, political strategy or whatever. It seems like, I don't know, for me, I kind of feel like that outside of like, history turning and material conditions ripening, we're unlikely to see, even if you had good strategies or micro strategies, say communist micro strategies that were targeted at different, micro niches of society. I don't see much hope for that outside of large scale, material conditions changing such that, the that the rules of the game, say, become up for grabs. Are you trying to say that you see, like, what are you trying to get at with the micro classes there?
Well, there's a number of things. There's one that's just analytical, understanding the formation of class consciousness as a real process instead of how some German Russian guys imagined it 100 years ago and turned out to be wrong. Then there's what Arnold from Fight Like an Animal calls the differentiated appeal, something that advertisers are good at and leftists are famously not. And a lot of political actors are not terribly good at the differentiated appeal. A lot of Marxist theory is sort of written for sociologists, more or less, or certain types of academics. And a lot of the stuff that we find convincing kind of flows from who we are. If you were, let's say, trying to build a mass revolutionary movement or something, you cannot rely on people that have the dispositions of sociology professors to be your sole guide in building like a sort of coalition or whatever. So I don't know. I guess there's a couple approaches from which I find this interesting. It's not that I think that, clearly the march of history is between sociologists and plumbers. And we need to put in all of our resources into attracting plumbers or doubling down on sociologists or whatever. Like
the march of history is between Grusky and Slutsky.
Yeah,
Slutsky and sluts.
Grusky and sluts probably do have something a bone to pick, but that's for another. We've slandered.
Did you say bone? Did you say bone?
No. Everyone is crazy. I never said a word. Never said anything. Tom, you've been talking this whole time.
Yeah, no. It's just like, just like what for me, I kind of feel like outside of large scale material conditions changing, that these strategies are new ideas that we can get out from understanding this stuff, I still wouldn't give them much hope. That's the way I approach it.
Yeah, sure. But Marxists are kind of useless for the most part. So, if there's like a little bit of utility, that'd be cool. Instead of just people getting their, you know what I'm saying? Like we're trying to like.
Well, what's interesting to me is that it feels like, thinking of like Joe Plumber, not the actual guy, Joe Plumber, Jesus, but your average like working class schmo in America, or anywhere really, like the thing that they're going to like really identify with is their occupation more than their big class. But what's interesting is that according to Whedon and Grusky's own empirical research, microclasses are more predictive in almost every single way except in life outcomes. And in that case, big classes are much more predictive.
Or as predictive.
And so, or at least as predictive, right. And so...
I think they stated that the big classes were more predictive with life outcomes and...
Did they? Okay, then, yeah, let me just check.
Occupationals.
Let me get to it.
Yeah, we'll get it. We'll get to it. But just as a matter of general discussion.
The point is, like, it's interesting how, without being, inundated with Marxist theory, the average worker is just going to, like, be identifying with their occupation. But then the thing that matters most to most people, I would say, bread, food, where's my next meal coming from? How's my life doing? Where is my income? their big class, the thing that they don't really think about
Mhm.
consciously, is actually much more predictive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do also think it might, like, when was this book written again?
About 2010, I think.
2010. Okay, that's interesting. Because I think, pardon?
2015, sorry.
Oh, really? Okay, so later than I thought. All right, that's it. Because one thing about Grusky and we like this micro class framework, there is an aspect of it where I wonder if it's like it's a very kind of the way that Wright frames it is like it's a very kind of end of history type of analysis, right? Like it's an analysis that's born out of a period of time in which both alternatives to like global neoliberal capitalism seem to be like more or less non-existent, and in which the political horizons of people are oriented at best around moderate reform and often like not even that, right? And I do wonder to the extent to which these same types of arguments make as much sense in a period of, I guess, like what Gramsci would have called like an organic crisis, right? Like a crisis in which like people are no longer convinced that they're going to be able to reproduce themselves and the well-being of their family and so on. In which case, I feel like that some kind of big class might in the end up being a little more predictive. Like I think you sort of see that with the rise of various forms of like right populism and so on, where like people really start reaggregating around, even though micro class positions tend to like make a pretty big impact, like whether or not you're like a member of like the petit bourgeois, like small property, small business owner, it seems to have a big impact on whether or not you like go Trump versus being like a petit bourgeois, like educated professional who ends up going kind of centrist Dem or something in the States. But there is a certain amount of, I think, of reaggregation that happens when things are kind of in a state of sort of crisis, and people can't take the reproduction of the system they live under and their own life chances for granted. So I don't know. I think that's something worth considering, like whether or not that is still like whether or not that there is still some predictive worth in thinking of like maybe think of the relationships between micro classes and so-called big classes.
Right.
Yeah, I think this kind of like relates to what he gets at towards the end of the chapter, where he's kind of refuting a line of argument from before, like if something isn't active in the world, why should a sociologist care about it? And so you can say that this argument was made earlier in the book about class is only real insofar as there's economic organizations that represent it, and in this case, it's sort of taken to its logical extreme. Class is only real to the extent that people think in terms of it, and it affects how they that it operates in this specific way. And Eric Olin Wright consistently makes the argument that no, even if these kind of bigger class things aren't the subject of what people are thinking about all the time, it's not like it sort of seems like it was in the old days, with workers' movements and stuff, where even if those, I don't know, in our collective memory, we think of those as much more universal kind of humanist things than they really were, it was a little more profession oriented, a little more industry oriented around logistics. And I guess like there are these moments of upheaval that Wright points to, and he's pointing to the response to Scott Walker's anti-union activity and Governor Scott Walker's anti-union activity in Wisconsin in 2011. I think he was governor anyway.
Yeah.
And the victory of Syriza in Greece, and whatever we think of his examples. The point is that, as you're saying, Bob, there are these moments of reaggregation where the big classes matter again, and it almost seems like it comes from out of nowhere sometimes. But if you're a good sociologist, of course it doesn't come from nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And
Right.
and you know what we might think of as big classes might shift as capitalism shifts, right? Like, I mean, there's some been arguments made by areas of kind of like the intellectual traditions of things like autonomous Marxism, like people like Lazzarato or so on. That, for instance, like your relationship to financial speculation, and real estate can play a pretty significant impact on like, which is certainly at this point somehow relates to your position within regimes and relations of production, right? Like in Canada right now, for instance, the political divide between homeowners and renters is massive because of like 30 years of like using loose monetary policy, or what people like Nick Srnicek call like right, like fiscal Keynesianism, right? Monetary Keynesianism or asset-based Keynesianism, right? Where it's like, oh, like all of a sudden there's this, all of a sudden there's this like real division. Like there's tons of people who are who are young people who, like, people think of as like woke or whatever, who seem to be moving to a far right candidate based on that person's promise to like not keep just pumping cheap money into the economy in order to keep real estate prices spiraling out of control, right? Because all of a sudden people who have very different occupations find their life chances extremely connected to each other based on how they relate to finance capital, and how they and as part of that, how they relate to real estate, right? In a capitalist economy, Canada, in which real estate is a ludicrously massive chunk of the economy, and also of people's assets. So it's like that's not a agglomeration that would make any sense when things are going okay for everybody, where like the system seems to be running fairly well. Like, even if running fairly well means like brutally exploiting a large part of your working base. But now all of a sudden it's become a really huge predictor. It seems to be becoming a very big predictor of where you're going to land politically, right?
Right. We see
Do you
in
own a
like
house or do you rent?
like we see the same process in Ireland with Sinn Féin doing well because of housing policy. Like we see that, we say that it's financialization, but really it's in the relations of production that have led to financialization. So somebody might have that direct link, but it's really because of the relations of production that have shifted away, and we've got a different kind of an economic model that's kind of evolved in the West. But yeah, like to me, it seems like the most important thing to understand. Like it's not even clear to me like how you can do research on the which predicts more, say micro classes or say large classes, because it seems to me that that it's very, very time dependent. That these aren't static relations. That you can see that the predictive quality of, say, the large classes are obviously different in different times. And I would say, if that is true, we would have to say it's probably very true that the micro classes also have different effects at different times. So like our one of our kind of things to do is to try and see these dynamics as well, and to be able to help build strategies around the grand scale dynamics that are happening in the economy.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to point to any dynamic that leads to the reemergence of the large classes, it would be kind of cracks in the foundations of society that can, guarantee a certain level of consumption, and it's what like a body of sociological research calls post-material needs, and the kind of psychological expressive needs that dominate politics once the food supply stabilizes, and the assassinations over whether workers or capitalists are going to control capitalism subside, and labor unions get kind of corralled into their place. Excuse me. The whole kind of class compact stabilizing process, and then the elimination of labor unions. Now it looks like I don't want to say the falling apart of the logistics grid, but the obvious decay of the logistics grid in the face of, like, over the past 5 years, and the way that the shelves look in America.
Okay, all right, yeah.
Like, and in the United States, I am talking about like the tiger's mouth, the belly of the beast. But it's telling that you have empty shelves out here.
Yeah.
Like those, I think that kind of material stability as a way of like taking the piss out of the big classes, even though they are still big determinants. And, you know, I wouldn't be a Marxist if I didn't think so. But yeah, once that stability goes away, that is really when you start to see, and
Yeah.
I guess to point to what Bob is saying about the housing market and the, you know, extreme difference. If you can see, you know, I have to adjust the American economy for never having 2007, like,
Right.
and kind of imagining if that trend continued. And there's enormous resentment here between renters and homeowners.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same everywhere. Like in the West, that is the tactic, the long-term end goal of like the breakdown in the, you know, the compromise between labor and capital in the post-war period is essentially the commodification of housing full scale, and a shift towards a rentier capital class, and a whole swathe of people that cannot afford to buy a home. Like that
that's so destabilizing here. That's the dynamic that Engels pointed to. That was like, I don't know about this American workers movement. They could probably just all be bought off with this cheap expropriated land. Like,
right, and they were.
There wasn't a single thing that any of the big heads of Marxism that said about America that was as accurate as that.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
The Beards were the most right about that one.
I mean, Marx wasn't. Engels was.
Right. That's true.
And I think the other thing as well is that we have had, like, because of the collapse of that, like, the other dynamic that's incredibly important to me is because of that collapse of the compact, we have, you know, this dynamic we see everywhere, where all the social democratic parties had nowhere to go, only to the right, and the right-wing parties have only nowhere to go, only to the right of that, and to culture war. And so we have this whole-scale shift of the political ground to the right, and like that systemically, that will see something grow. Like, it just, for me, like a system, just like it's a system necessity. Something will grow in response to that, and it's like, you know, that is to me a large thing with, like, I know it's the same process probably as well, but it's another aspect of that process that we're seeing with this rentier kind of return to a rentier capitalist dynamic.
Yeah, and I guess there's a sort of like there's part of the reason that I think it's a good reason to read this book right now is that when we started this book, there was a sort of wave of discussion around the quote PMC, the quote professional managerial class, and it came from a sort of reactionary place, a sort of class analysis that's like, who are these leftists anyway? They're a bunch of sociology professors and English teachers, but, you know, kind of like doing a professional sort of analysis of the coalition of the types of people who tend to be into this stuff. And it, you know, seems pretty obvious that the right has their own kind of coalition of grifters, right? Like,
they have their own PMC, really.
They have their own quote PMC,
Yeah.
but they're slightly, like, the professions are different.
They're different
Like,
professions.
It's a different coalition of professions, and that's, you know, it would be sort of helpful for us to think about that. Like, in America, there are these like grifters and like real estate proprietarians and fucking, I don't know, oil.
What are they? What are their professions? Seriously, what is the professions of these right-wing grifters, do you reckon?
For the right-wing grifters, I would say, I mean, less like oil, thinking of like the middle, like the PMC kind of middle management type of people, the professional people who aren't like big bourgeois. What comes to mind first is obviously econ professors or economics people.
Sure, yeah.
Right. And then
evolutionary biologists.
Yeah,
a bunch of them joined. Like the right wing kind of whatever you want to call it, discourse coalition or block or whatever, right? Like a lot of them are these people like who have some kind of basis in psychology or evolutionary biology of some kind, right?
Oh yeah, like a lot of the academics, they're like mirror images of the left. They're just, you know, a different part of the two academic cultures, let's say. The more positivist, you know, common sense. We just did all this math to prove something that Reagan wants. So, like,
what would a hunter-gatherer from 10,000 years do for a Rolex watch? That's the type of analysis they do.
Yeah, like what? Well, but beyond
What
that,
would you do for a Rolex watch?
beyond that, there are like I don't know. This is not maybe the biggest force in the right, but like alternative health hucksters.
Yeah,
That's a big that was a big thing in American society that kind of spun off even from the new left and new religious movements, but is now like it's not where a lot of leftists are coming from.
no, that's been ceded to the right fully, and
Well, and COVID has pushed that too, right? Like
but this was a
very,
dynamic
very hard.
that
Like,
was present before COVID.
But you're both totally.
I just mean it's. I think it's intent. I think it's intensified the dynamic. You're completely
Absolutely.
right. Like there was a lot of talk, for instance, like I just came from the west coast of Canada, and it's all like kind of granola shit, right? And like tons of yoga people went full QAnon.
Right.
Because their communications networks and kind of even their digital social networks and so on were so easily articulated with a kind of QAnon right leaning thing. So actually when they found out in terms of who went the most hardcore far right anti-vax startup party in Canada, the People's Party of Canada, not an anonymous sounding name. It turns out that the party, like the first party that lost the most votes to them, in which they gained a huge amount of votes in the last election, were the Conservatives, which made sense to me. But the party that lost the second largest share of their voters was the Green Party.
Let us guess. Did anybody hear who he said it was?
I heard it, but I won't say.
Okay, you guess.
Say it again, there, Bob. I was going to say the Greens.
Yes.
The Greens.
All right.
Ding, 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 ding. Tom, you're the winner. You guess what you won?
Yeah.
What did I win?
You won a one-way ticket to hell.
You'll be spending a luxury 7-day stay in Quebec. Anyway.
That's the same thing. Is that the same thing?
That's a joke.
But yeah, if you're involved in that kind of new age health space, I mean, that might be a very good example of kind of a micro class effect, and
a differentiated appeal. The way Q went after the crunchies is exemplary.
Yeah.
I don't love political manipulation, but if there's a bunch of I don't. I kind of hate it on an interpersonal level. I think it's usually fucked up. However, in aggregate, when you're dealing with the potential of a bunch of crunchies that might go fash because they're and look, I'm a little skeptical of this narrative, but I'm going to just regurgitate it because they got, the algorithm is their sorting hat, and it just brought out some fascism that wasn't there before. Again,
right.
I'm a little skeptical here, but if
Ebola,
right, but if Marxists can I don't know, if they could do something to intervene so that a bunch of people that just want peace, love, and understanding, don't become Nazis or whatever, then sure, fine. And so, thinking about making our appeals a little more modular, to the different types of people. Once we get our head out of German metaphysics, we realize that the proletariat isn't this abstract sphere of being that's undifferentiated. It's like, this is another thing that I like about this kind of sociological analysis that Wright is pulling from, and it's I don't know, Marxists hate it for good and bad reasons, is that it concerns the thoughts of the people involved. It shows a concern for their consciousness and where it comes from, really, and not it should come from this because their life chances and the property relations say it should come from this. Okay, and if we all behaved like rational choice robots, sure, we would do that. But it's not the people I've known. That's not the life I've lived.
But it's not even. I would even say if you're a rational choice person, in your own small, rational choices that you have to make, you go on the micro classes because there is no avenue for the major thing. The conditions aren't correct. So it's I
guess I've always taken that rationality would mean long-term thinking, which would mean, of course, communism. But that's not how everybody thinks.
Well, what this also reminds me of is that there's a kind of interesting take on standpoint epistemology, but taking it not as epistemology, but rather methodology.
Yeah.
from Marxist feminist Dorothy Smith about how our institutional, the kind of institutional relations that we have with our colleagues, but also with the institutions themselves, shape our thoughts and opinions and our standpoint, right? And the kind of micro classes, the occupation as the institutional framework in which the game, in which the moves that we make are determined, right? Is, and how that forms our kind of cultural and political viewpoints or cultural and political standpoints, if you will, is, I think, fascinating. I also want to say that I blame Oprah for the right-wing health grift.
Yeah,
That's fair. That's definitely fair. Yeah, you know,
I'm not even being ironic. I do blame Oprah.
Well,
I'd say in even another place, like you can see the political importance of that the micro classes is like, at least here as a from where I am in Canada, right, where it's like oil and gas workers.
Yeah.
Right, where like the relationship of oil and gas workers to the like kind of what you might call like a kind of an extractivist regime of accumulation that structures like Canada's political economy, and that is also entwined with finance and so on, means like if you were just looking, it's like, okay, they don't own the oil companies, they don't own the rigs,
Right.
they are wage work or they're salary workers. Well, they should be somehow allied with, you know, other wage workers. What's really happened is that they've become much more politically enmeshed and supportive of their employers, right? Like, and here's where
they're very well paid, though, aren't they, Bob?
Yes, but this is what I'm getting at, where it's like the structure of the oil and gas economy in Canada has allowed them to simultaneously be much better paid than the average waged or salary worker who does not like own the means of production in Canada, but also has allowed, but is also, there's like an ignorance of their own, like the only economy they work in, where it's like, oh no, fossil capital in Canada has like worked very hard to like undermine structurally any kind of refining activity, which would like maximize the amount of jobs per barrel of oil and gas that we produce, which would be good for them. It has worked really hard to like minimize royalty payments as per share of barrel produced, so that when there's a decline in prices, all of their services are dried up. Like there's no savings in their local communities and their local governments to pay for things like services and so on. And so it's like they're simultaneously like getting screwed by the faction of capital that employs them, but it's also given them very different life chances, worldviews. Many of them don't have need college or university educations, which means that there's like a whole area of a common cultural capital. And so like if you weren't looking at the very specific aspects of the like micro class of oil and gas workers, which itself is actually variated and segmented in a whole bunch of ways, you would not be able to you'd be like, oh, well, like, I don't know, like the environmental movement's like promising them like a just transition or whatever. And it's like, none of them buy it. Right.
No.
But
all they see is somebody threatening their job, and they have a good paying job.
And someone threatening their job who has a university education, who says, going back, unfortunately, to that like PMC argument, like there is a certain amount of truth to it. It's like the environmentalists mostly come from bourgeois backgrounds, or increasingly some of the environmental justice movement is indigenous, but even many indigenous peoples are being like integrated into that industry, even if that industry is like destroying like their territories in a whole variety of ways. But it's like, yeah, they're being rapidly, like they are like the cutting edge of like the neo-fascist movement in Canada. And I will say though, I do agree with the skepticism of like the liberal thing of like blaming everything on the algorithm, but certainly filter bubbles and echo chambers that are partially algorithmic and are also partially being constructed by right-wing grifters online very consciously. That is playing a role. Like it is helping connect people's experiences to and life experiences and kind of micro class position to a particular political project and the interests of other classes and groups. in a way that is not just, it's algorithmic, but it's also very conscious. Like there's organic intellectuals that just spend all their time working online to keep people within those spaces. It's not like just
the algorithm thing isn't like completely bullshit. It's bullshit in that, like, that, you know, the example that Ezra was giving earlier with the crunchy people, like there's always been an element of fascism within hippie crunchy culture. That's not just brought out by Facebook algorithms, but Facebook algorithms or social media algorithms in general are not fully responsible, but they play a role. They just do.
They take advertising.
They are part of the overdetermination of, right? Like they are a key aspect of what's happening.
If you take the black pill on the Enlightenment and that it becomes its own reactionary myth making, you know, it's all over the place. And it's just that, like, certain expressions can bring it out. Like I was into alternative hip hop, and there are a lot of crunchy people there, and people that are very predisposed to being like racially integrated. So in some ways, like, you know, you would expect left-wing biases, a lot of sympathies towards Black nationalism, this sort of thing. This does not necessarily go in a left-wing direction. Anyone that's paid attention to the career of KRS-One, for instance, will know that he became
he became a Trumper, right?
He became like a hard right guy. Yeah, he was in one of Alex Jones's documentaries. Yeah. Like,
same thing with Professor Griff from Public Enemy.
Although
Professor Griff
was always anti-Semitic, right?
Yeah, he was very anti-Semitic.
No, but that guy's honestly just holding the torch for an old reactionary form of Black nationalism. He's sort of a different problem. But
wasn't there also like a certain
wanted to
level of
make
like white intellectual naivety where like people misunderstood the political complexity and contradictions within various forms of Black nationalism? Right. Like Corey Robin just wrote that whole book I wanted to read on like Clarence Thomas, where he's like, he's not just like a sellout. It's like there's a weird reactionary strain of Black nationalism he grew up with that just makes him hate the state, hate the idea of the welfare state, and just really want like African Americans in the United States to just be fighting a war of all against all, right? Like it's a weird Hobbesian shit show that Robin at the very least argues, I don't know how good the argument is, but argues that some of that, it's not like he just turned his head. He just turned away from his radical roots. It's that the radical roots were always kind of ambivalent in some ways, and they could go in different ways depending on the situation, you know? Like it's I understand like
about exactly a broader swath of Black intellectuals, not just the right, but yeah.
Okay, everybody, I have a question for you. This is like a quiz. Okay, guess who's back in the chat?
Good old Oswald Spengler.
What? Yes, we see
Mr. Decadence himself.
Our friend Wayne Slutsky is in the chat.
Yeah, Wayne Gretzky is here.
Yeah.
Spengler.
Who would have thought that Wayne Gretzky was such a fan of our show?
I feel bad because I'm looking at Wayne Gretzky and I'm realizing I think he is just kind of a bog standard Canadian conservative. I'm not sure he's a fascist, but I will say Spengler is looking fantastic for his age.
Did you say that you saw Wayne Gretzky doing a Hitler salute to a maple flag? Like
that is what I say, and I stand by it in the public record.
I do stand by it with my hand raised in an
Wayne Gretzky ate my baby that I birthed out of my vagina.
Yeah, I was swear on a copy of Wayne Gretzky's 3D hockey. Okay. I fucking love Wayne Gretzky's 3D hockey. That game was revelatory. All right,
game rips.
Yeah,
you're not wrong.
Right. Will we start the second slide?
Yeah. Let's read some slides.
Yeah, I know we've kind of talked around it, so we can skip where we
great.
So I'll take the first one then. So basically, this work by Grusky and Whedon started in the late 90s, and as basically came up with this whole new idea of micro-class analysis. Their proposal was to build class analysis on the basis of highly disaggregated occupational categories or micro-classes. This is in contrast to the typical big classes of the Marxist Weberian traditions. Grusky considers this a neo-Durkheimian approach to class analysis, in recognition of Durkheim's understanding of occupations as the fundamental unit of economic activity, solidarity, and interest in the developed capitalist economies. Wright will go on to argue that these different approaches to class tap into different kinds of causal mechanisms that are appropriate for different kinds of analysis. Does anyone want to say anything about Durkheim? So I don't really know much sociology. So who was Durkheim and what's their kind of buzz?
Durkheim is kind of considered the foundational figure of sociology as a whole, but specifically of functionalism. You know what structural functionalism is?
Give us a definition there, Sophia.
So conflict theory, which is associated with Marx and kind of views Marx as the founder, conflict theory looks at sociology through the framework of conflicting social interests, whereas functionalism looks at sociology as there's a purpose to different institutions, and if there is a conflict, then something has gone wrong. I don't know if that's a 100% accurate definition. It's been a while since I took Sociology 101, but
I
right.
feel, yeah. I mean, Durkheim himself is like an earlier figure in sociology. He wrote
he's considered the founder of sociology. Basically,
the single, like if there's one guy, it's Durkheim.
Does he predate Weber?
Yeah,
he does.
Yeah, it predates Weber.
The first kind of sociological text is his book on suicide.
Yes, yeah. It's a study of suicide rates in Catholic and Protestant populations, where he more or less argues that
rosy stuff.
Well, that so-called civilized people tend to commit suicide more. Richer people tend to commit suicide more. People that don't struggle with the conditions of existence tend to commit suicide more. It's a foundational study in sociology. Extraordinarily positivist, Durkheim.
Mm-hmm.
Really wants to make it a science. So maybe part of the spirit that a lot of Marxists object to in sociology that I don't necessarily. But what makes it neo-Durkheimian is probably best for other people to kind of get into. I suppose because of this, emphasis on prediction and classical sort of positivist hopes for sociology, perhaps. And
there's a footnote where Wright explains why this is they consider themselves neo-Durkheimian versus just Durkheimian, but it's kind of beside the point.
So would it be a fair thing to say about what you're talking about, how it's like a positivist, is that if you consider if you were to look at physics or something, you would say if something was positivist, that it's not looking at the kind of the core essence, but looking at the the epiphenomena and using predicting using epiphenomena instead of phenomena.
I mean, I certainly don't think that they would consider themselves as using epiphenomena. They think by a positivist approach to social science imagines that if you can capture the predictive sort of function, then you've identified the essence of some sort.
Yeah, whatever you're not able to measure is not a thing that really exists, right? It's not like there's some kind of core, some kind of hidden core to the world that the phenomena is expressing in a mystified or misleading manner, right? It's you look at what's happening, and then that's the essence, right?
To put it in a way that you might be more familiar with, Tom, is that a positivist would just dismiss. A positivist in the social sciences would dismiss labor theory of value outright because the kind of core essence of labor is not something that's necessarily measurable, or maybe not labor, but what's the kind of
value
rather, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, marginalist theories of value are much more attractive to a positivist viewpoint, in in kind of classical economics, depending on how your opinion of neoclassical economics, I guess, but precisely because it's what the difference between what someone is willing to pay and what someone's willing to sell it for is easily measurable. right? Like
Yeah.
it's the price. It's the price. Like they don't like neoclassical economics doesn't care about like the idea that there's some like hidden foundation for how economic value is produced that may not be measured in the price signal that simply emerges between the sellers and buyers, the interaction of sellers and buyers on the market. The only thing they really care about, like, because like that's just like metaphysics, right?
Yeah. However, there are more rationalistic forms of positivistic analysis because that's where the whole concept of value in political economy comes from. They're trying to make a science out of economics, and they posit value as this rationalistic term. And if they can justify it within the realm of, scientific, hypothesis and deduction or whatever, then it's okay. But I think what you said, since like the 1970s, basically, where people more or less fall on the side of, this Marx is actually just sort of doing critical theory and the numbers aren't important, versus, well, we have this really nice neo-Ricardian reconstruction. Yeah, that's definitely where value theory and positivism sort of part ways. I guess the other thing I'd say about Durkheim is that he's an extreme holist. When it comes to analysis, he's not extraordinarily concerned with the actions of individuals. He is concerned with big groups, social facts, and Wright is more individualist than Durkheim. Like Wright prefers to break things down, even though he doesn't think it should be required. He shares some of the sort of methodological holism of Durkheim, I guess, but
Wright is interesting because even within sociology, he's a bit of a rare beast in which he wants to look at both micro and macro scale phenomena. Usually in sociology, at least from what I recall from my 101 class,
pick one.
Yeah, you're either doing micro or macro, and if you're doing micro, it's symbolic interactionism. Good job, kiddo. Anyway. I hope that explains Durkheim.
I don't know.
We really fucked him up. Right. Okay. Let's keep going. We didn't fuck him up.
Should we read that footnote where he kind of goes into the difference? Because, I get Durkheim, I get Grusky Whedon model.
Give me a second and I get up on the screen.
I feel like we haven't answered the
question. I think
it's
121. I kind of flipped to it. Let me see.
Just let me get it on the screen for a second.
Sure.
Sorry, 1 second here. Shit, where's my thing gone? I was just looking at it. Okay. What's it called?
it's a second footnote, is it?
Is it
this one?
It might be, yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Think you're right, eh? Get it? Okay.
Hey.
It starts with Grusky's characterization.
Oh, Slutsky's back.
113, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I said. Gretzky's characterization.
Wayne Gretzky characterization.
There we go.
Hockey.
What a renaissance man.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
And
sociology, hockey, he does it all.
Yeah.
Imagine being so good at those two different. Yeah, he straddles multiple micro classes.
Yeah, I mean, it's what he believes must be like a superposition that can collapse at any moment.
I'd give him a blowjob.
Yeah, you would.
So, number 2, footnote 2 on page 113.
Fascist. It's just a right fascist. Sorry, I'm doing my best Hamid.
Grusky's characterization of his approach as neo-Durkheimian is most clearly developed in Foundations of Neo-Durkheimian Class Analysis. His treatment of occupations as the core basis for solidarities in the division of labor differs from Durkheim's analysis by dropping the idea of the functional interdependence among occupations. Collective consciousness and other elements of Durkheim's theory of organic solidarity. It retains an affiliation with Durkheim in its focus on occupations within the divisions of labor as the central units of coherent social organization in modern society, but largely disengages from Durkheim's broader agenda of social theory. So basically, what makes them neo-Durkheimian is that they they're dropping the idea of functional independence among occupations, collective consciousness, and other elements of Durkheim's. So basically, they drop the interdependent stuff and the collective consciousness stuff.
Yeah,
they're a little bit less
functionality.
holistic, actually.
Yeah. So yeah.
So they're even less systemic. They take out these kind of, relational stuff between the occupations.
It seems like it, yeah. Because Durkheim is
functional interdependence.
Right.
It could be conflict. It could be something else.
Right.
Yeah, but having a holistic model of how the two things work in a system, like how this, for instance, Marxism tends to synthesize conflict theory and function. Like we think about what class struggle has this ultimate goal, this telos inside of it. That's unusual for conflict theory in a sense, like at least as understood by bare sociology, where what's the purpose of a conflict? I don't know. Could just be to fight. Like Marxists are like, no. You don't understand. This is history unfolding.
Right.
Like, and this drops that kind of sense of greater social telos. I don't know what kind of sociology it would fall into, by those behavioral or whatever, like standard. Maybe it is, behavioral. Yes.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
it's important. Yeah.
No, sorry. Go on if you want, Sophia.
Oh, all I was going to say is that it's interesting to note two things about Durkheim that's different here. Well, something that's similar and something that's different. Durkheim is known as like a macro sociologist, and this is very much, as the name implies, not. It's micro. But what's similar about both of them is that Durkheim and structural functionalism has a reputation for being a bit conservative. And this comes from like a neoliberal kind of end of history view of like, well, there isn't, the game that we're playing is settled, it's capitalism. The rules of the game are basically settled. There's a tendency in the Western developed capitalist countries towards just accepting neoliberalism as the standard. So now we're just going to focus on what moves you can make within the game in this microclass analysis.
Cool. Okay. Let me do the next slide here. Continuing this overview.
That'll probably be chopped into 10 minutes. Like that 10 minutes will probably be chopped. Nice. Hey, what did Neo Durkheim mean? Oh, it means this. Anyway.
No, seriously. The more
That's good.
The more content, the better, baby. That's what I say. It's like
It's new Netflix, yeah.
That's it.
Right,
The
the same
Right,
philosophy, yeah. Just like
you gotta
film
go by what
everything.
works. Yeah. You
Film it
remember
enough
what
for it.
works. Netflix is a great model.
Netflix never has a problem. Always great. Making a lot of money.
I'm just thinking like Vouch. This is like Vouch, or Vosh.
Oh,
How do you pronounce that
not.
motherfucker's name?
Do not.
Oh.
Do not.
Can we
what's
go back?
what's the deal? What's the deal with that
I'd
guy?
rather
That's
be
not
Netflix.
part of the podcast.
Whoa. Let's just go back to talking about, sucking Wayne Gretzky's dick or something. Something a little less disgusting. I don't know. I can't really get on this.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, well, and we don't even know about this because, like, as far as I know, none of us know what Gretzky's dick looks like, what it's about, But like, we have a pretty good idea of what this vodka is.
I kind of imagine it has like a curve. And it's like a
it smells
like a hockey
player,
just like a hockey, yeah.
Are we
Yeah.
getting back to that bit about the Bill Clinton's bent penis? Are we going there again?
Well,
I never
you
left-
see, it's
yeah.
like a hockey stick. Anyway, it's a good.
Yeah.
That was a gem. It was a gem of a joke, Tom. And I feel like you're not listening.
Bob,
did you know that Bill Clinton had a bent dick?
I think I knew that since like I was 12 years old, just because it was the only thing that was always on talk shows and stuff and Saturday Night Live and all that stuff when I was a kid, right?
Well, I said this, I think, on Swampside or something, and everybody was like, "What are you talking about, man?"
I feel like for me,
I felt like I was a mentalist. I was like, "Oh no, did I dream that?"
I think I was a bit too young, and my parents didn't let me watch shows that were about Bill Clinton's dick.
Yeah, I feel like I was at the age where
8 or whatever, but
so I was probably like 12, so it was like I was watching all that stuff, and so the only thing I knew about dicks other, I guess, than my own was that Bill Clinton's was curved, right? That's like the only thing
in
I
your
knew.
mind, there's two
Yeah.
kinds of dicks.
Two
Yours
dicks.
and
Bill
curved Bill
Clinton's.
Clinton's.
That's right.
That's like a good metaphor for, you know, symbolic patriarchy if I've ever heard it.
Oh,
you know what I
fuck.
mean? Like,
There you go.
Yeah.
it's the only dick I can compare it with is the president's.
Fuck. We just
I'm
went
a-
very Freudian.
Yeah, and it comes out pretty good in comparison.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, this conversation's taken a real turn.
It really, I feel like Barack
Yeah.
Obama is going to be the last president whose genitals we don't know what they look like. And everyone
Uncommon.
from that forward, it's just the probability that there won't be some kind of description or, you know, just photographic documentation once you get past a certain age. Like, no, just like everyone born now has a picture of their genitals on the internet, more like in 20 years, more or less.
Somewhere, yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and so there conceivably there will just be a succession of presidents in every country where if some description or documentation of their genitals. I just want to point out how unusual that is.
Basically, every president or prime minister that emerges in the post-Tinder era.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Inevitably, right? Whereas Barack is still from the period of time where he understands the mystique, the political value of mystique.
That's right.
I'm fully in favor. I'm fully in favor of bringing back like the idea of like where we can like, you know, preserve, you know, like Napoleon's penis and then sell it, you know, as a collectible. That we should be doing that with all the leaders.
Well, with once we crack quantum, you know, encryption, and we can just, you know, destroy all the old security algorithms, we'll be able to mint nice NFTs of every, you know, politician's genitals. It'll be, you know, it'll be a real, it'll be better than dues funding, you know.
Oh dear. Okay, let me continue after that very strange detour. I don't even know how the fuck we got there. Okay. At the heart of the Grusky Whedon model is the exploration of the importance of disaggregated occupations that explain a wide range of phenomena, all that are also studied using conventional blah. Okay, that's bullshit. Okay, so for one possible. Sorry, I had somebody put their dick in my mouth. Okay, let's just skip to the next point. Like, one criticism that Wright have of their work is the use of the term class, albeit with the prefix micro. Why not just use the more transparent term occupation and frame it as occupational analysis? What do people make of that? I kind of agree with that, I think.
I 100% agree with everything that Wright says. He's like, yeah, it would make more sense to call it occupation. But I'm not going to quibble about terminology. Let's just move on. Like, 100% agree with all of that. Because there's a broader point and more interesting things to say about this than to quibble about the terminology.
But Wright is pointing to the ideological point that the reason that they're using class in this way
is to try to take the piss out of class.
Yeah, or to focus on something they think is more important, which obscures.
Right.
Or to obscure class, to obscure classes
altogether. It is not a completely insignificant point, but there is something more interesting happening with their model that is more worth talking about. However,
and that Wright's more interested in doing.
Yes.
Yeah. I think most Marxists would stop there at the ideology. Can't you see that this is ideology? It doesn't matter that it is true or predictive. You know, like as if you know, Malthusian population models weren't ideology and science at the same time. You know what I mean? Like
or Marx's old point about the economics textbooks of his day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Was he say it's like where it's just like the idealist socialists are like claiming the economics textbooks are like totally just made up, and Marx's whole point is like, as you know, it's like, oh, like they're so naive, as though they think the problem is that the textbooks are wrong, right? Where he's like, no, it's like the issue with the textbooks is simultaneously that they are accurate to a certain state of affairs but that the purposes for which you've even established the entire analytical framework is ideological. Right, like that there's certain things that they want to be able to know and understand about capitalism, and there's certain things that they don't. It's not that they're just made up. It's that they could simultaneously be ideological and and accurate. In fact, simultaneously ideological and factual, like the algorithm argument of centrists.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like jazz. It's about the notes you don't play.
It's about
Or-
the
Use
or-
value and there's use value. They're not the same thing.
Yeah.
Something could be useful and false, useful and true. It's okay.
Or if you're John Coltrane, it's the extra 4,000 notes you play.
Yeah. No, that's maximalist jazz.
Maximalist. Yeah. Okay. So Grusky and Whedon's model of class is animated by a very general question. What is it about a person's location within a system of production that best explains the sorts of things theorists of class have always wanted to explain? Life chances, income, political attitudes and behavior, cultural tastes, etc. There must be, they reason, something about the homogeneity of interests, of experiences, and other conditions connected to a location that generates homogeneity of these outcomes. Most sociologists see this homogeneity as generated within big classes. Grusky Whedon argue that this homogenization, Christ almighty, I worked in a creamery with a homogenizer for milk and I can't even say it right. Homogenization. You people know I know when I think about homogenization, I literally think about mixing milk and cream. Like it's the first thing that comes to my mind.
It's a good metaphor. Yeah, mine too, actually.
Yeah.
The farmers co-op, the farmers co-op that my father worked in, I used to work in. They were the only place left in Ireland that produced non-homogenized milk. There you go.
Wow.
Oh dang.
As long as
Because-
it's pasteurized, man.
Well, it's pasteurized, but you see, homogenized. When you homogenize, you break up the
it's
milk
different.
and the fat so much that the fat takes longer the cream takes longer to congeal, and it takes longer for the milk to go sour. So that's why everything is homogenized. So there you go.
I actually didn't know that part.
I
That's
didn't
cool.
know that either. Yeah.
Yeah, so like our milk would like go off in about 3 days, and normal milk would go off in about a week. There you go.
That's
Okay.
interesting.
Oh, wow.
But apparently it's better for your heart, non-homogenized milk, because the fat it's easier for your stomach to process it away, and it doesn't go into your bloodstream as much. There you go. Learn something every day.
That makes sense. It probably is very easy to get emulsified when it's just
Right.
in clumps like that.
Yeah. There you go. Okay, sorry, last point. Most sociologists see this homogeneity as generated within big classes. Grusky Whedon, however, argue that this homogenization operates much more intensively at the level of detailed occupations. Like I have no problems with any of this. Like I can imagine that's true. I can imagine it's also not true at certain stages in history. You know, when material conditions cause what you were talking about, Bob, earlier. These these disaggregation and reaggregations, and that they can be overwhelmed by the reaggregation effect. I think I would. I think that sounds pretty straightforward. Anybody have anything to say on this, or have we covered it already?
I totally agree. I think the only thing I can add is that if you can't pronounce homogeneity, just call it big homo and move on.
Most
so
sociologists
get you some
see
new
this big
subscribers.
homo. Yeah. So most sociologists see this big homo as generated in big classes.
Unless you're Lacanian or Deleuzian, and then you have to, your starting point is that there is no such thing as the big homo. Yeah.
Well, there we go.
Well,
What is there?
Well, they're just wrong.
Shh, don't tell anybody. We need to grift off of them, and we're fighting big glomo homo by doing it, so you don't have to, or something. I don't
Fighting
know.
big homo. I'm trying to get down with big homo.
Yeah, of course, honey. But yeah, we're leading the fight. Put it in our Patreon. We know that the Bernie Sanders campaign died, and so did the Corbyn one, and all our strategies are garbage. So we need all the money we can get. We're I don't know. I'm on the Jacobin train, babe. I'm trying to set up a.
Let's throw in with the far right and
and
fight big homo and
Yeah.
I want to be a red trad wife.
There we go.
I'm trying to get railed in a sundress this summer.
That's right. It's very important. Like, anyway, I don't know. If you position yourself against big homo, you might get some extra Patreon bucks over the next 10
Birth
years.
control. Who needs that? I'm trying to fucking shoot out red diaper babies.
Yeah, you need to keep up with population.
That's
very,
right.
Very important stuff. Anyway, back to Malthus, right?
Esri, do you want to take this next slide then?
Yeah. Yeah.
I actually
I
didn't.
like saying things I mean instead. Yeah.
I actually didn't put in any of the global homo stuff in the slides. I kind of left that stuff out. I thought the chapter.
What?
I didn't really understand like the relevance of it in the chapter.
Well,
just in the middle of the chapter, right?
It's completely important. Like, yeah, it's kind of. It does seem a little like off base. Where he starts ranting about the PMC promoting big global homo and trying to, brainwash all
kind
the
of
kids
in the
into being
middle.
trans. Yeah, I wasn't sure what that had to do with anything. I think it was just to sell books.
Yeah.
How did that work out for him?
Yeah. R.I.P. Eric Olin Wright. We're just kidding. All right. So the Grusky Whedon microclass model. All right. One of my favorite things I ever said on air is that I just said that Robert Brenner's description of capitalism is actually motivated by a deep racial hatred of the English, and it's I don't know. That was fun. I didn't feel bad about that one.
Fun and accurate.
Yeah, I'm just saying. Like I took a tone of like, yeah. Anyway, enough of that. So the Grusky-Whedon microclass model. The pivotal concept within this approach to class is occupation. For Grusky, the starting point for modern Durkheimian analysis is the unit occupation, which is defined as a group of technically similar jobs that are institutionalized in the labor market through such means as an association or union, licensing or certification requirements, or widely diffused understandings among employers, workers, and others regarding efficient or otherwise preferred ways of organizing production and dividing labor. So 1, some associations; 2, some kind of credentialing; 3, widely diffused understandings regarding efficiency or organization of production. The unit occupations are often generated through jurisdictional struggles between competing groups over functional niches in the division of labor. Occupation, defined this way, is for Grusky and Whedon a realist category that defines a person's location within a system of production. The categories are institutionalized in the actual practices of employers and associations. They are not simply analytical categories produced by academics. They see the reliance of invented analytical categories by most sociologists as one of the failings of class analysis that focuses exclusively on big classes.
So I have something to say.
As far as just to sort of respond to what we've been discussing, this realist category and this emphasis on, I would say it's essentially a type of empiricism more than it is just positivism. It's like because a lot of Marxists are very positivist about their class analysis. It's just that they make these hard assumptions and work from there. This is an attempt to look at things that pop out at you in the world, I guess.
Yeah, it's more positivist empiricism. But one of the things I wanted to...
Just from the data, basically.
Yeah, exactly. But one of the things I wanted to bring up was in regards to 3. I think what I thought of with 3 is I thought back to when I was working at Taco Bell, right? Or Subway, when I worked fast food.
This is the widely diffused understandings.
Yeah, but I don't know if widely diffused understandings is like an accurate term, but maybe a more accurate way to put it is like kind of the ways employers structure their training and their like monitoring regimes in order to maximize efficiency, and the ways workers in response try to undermine that. There's a shared cultural niche that you kind of gain working in fast food in America. For instance, like there's like very, kind of strict and long training actually at Taco Bell. That's like a lot of computer modules and like quizzes you have to do. More than I thought there would be.
Yeah.
And then, fast forward a couple months later, my shift lead is like putting a metal fucking lid on the end of a broomstick and waving it in front of the sensor at the drive-thru to make our drive-thru times go down. So that way we don't like get in trouble with our boss and with the franchise owner.
Yeah, but I think what Wright is referring to is more maybe you would think of as bootlickers, right? Like people that have like that behave in accordance with this ideological understanding. Like,
so people who actually follow the rules of the Taco Bell training, basically.
and yeah, more or less. Like, or I don't know. Am I wrong? Like, does that?
I mean, if that's the kind of
anybody else
thing that Grusky and Whedon are talking about, their conception of this isn't realist at all. I would say.
I mean, there's a lot of industries where people, especially before the labor market shortage changed, like before changes in the labor market, I met a great number of people who are extremely grateful for their jobs, no matter what they are, and did not kind of.
Yeah, those people always exist. But when I was working at Taco Bell, this was 10 years ago.
Yeah,
this was well before the kind of shift in labor market.
And I mean, I suppose regardless of how somebody.
Probably depends on the labor. Does it not depend on the type of labor more?
Surely it depends. Yeah, it surely would depend a bit on what you have to gain by internalizing the management's understanding of the work process. And so it's I think that and this might be a place where you sort of see this move from micro class to maybe larger classes, where it's if you're working fast food, right, there's very little material reason for you to internalize, right? For most people to internalize management or the owner class's understanding of what you do, which might be a little bit different than if you're I don't know, you work in a middle management type of position in a different industry where you are where you don't own capital, but there's you see the possibilities for maybe one day I'll own a house, or maybe I'll get a promotion, or maybe I'll do this, and so there's going to be a lot of variation, right? How much Gramsci's whole argument around Fordism, the rise of Fordism, right, was that the industrial automotive working class was going to gain certain types of benefits from an era of high mass consumption within their position that made it more feasible for them to go along with a class compromise after management had liquidated all the communists from their unions, right? But that's very different, I think, than I'm working in I'm making minimum wage or close to that. I've got no job security, and I'm also living in a system in which my pensions and minimum wage and pensions and everything are being constantly clawed back, right? So it's I guess it's very relational. I guess the analysis has to be very relational.
Yeah,
right?
and so internalizing this management understanding is probably related to how much room for advancement you see yourself having. Probably. I don't know.
I think
how much is housing cost at that particular period of time? What are sorry.
Yeah, I guess I've been in a bunch of arts and
that.
Sorry, just being in a bunch of arts industries, there are people that were just not getting paid, just fucking going into a hole, that were oh, I'm so lucky to be here. I've seen a lot of weird maladaptive shit that rhymes with this, and it probably it has to be highly relational. It makes sense that probably the only person at the Taco Bell that thinks that way is someone who wants to be the manager.
My shift lead was the one who taught me the thing with the metal lid on the end of the broomstick to make the sensor time go down.
Maybe that's the widely diffused understanding.
That is that is why diffused.
If that was your shift lead doing it, then
he was definitely breaking the rules, but he was definitely motivated to make those numbers look good for his boss.
We're talking about positivism. We're talking about positivism here. It's the stick and the metal as positivism for the companies.
That's data,
to understand how things work. Yeah, but the other thing I would say is, it's not purely. I understand what you're saying, all these about the different kind of relational stuff and all that, but it's also it fundamentally exploits people's kind of people. Lots of people have pride in their work, they like doing a good job. It also And like whether that's bootlicking, I think you can have pride in your work, even
No,
not be a
no.
bootlicker. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
No. That's of
You don't
course
think
I
so?
believe that.
No.
I just think that when you are constantly taken advantage of, and eventually you're faced with a choice is to continue being taken advantage of and kind of take it on the chin and justify it, or to kind of become resentful about it. You can have pride in a job well done, but no one likes being taken advantage of.
Yeah.
I know, but people put
That's-
up with these things. Like I just talk about my mother worked in a local bakery and she wasn't being treated right for quite a long time. She worked there fucking 20 years before she jacked it in. People
Listen,
do that kind of stuff.
I'm not calling your mom a bootlicker. I'm just saying that, like, based on what Sophia was saying about Taco Bell, you know, like, and how little of a shit all the people cared there, then it, like, I think the phenomenon that is, like, broadly kind of, I don't know, distributed throughout the economy that Grusky and Whedon are talking about probably is more visible at Walmart or something, where it's similarly
Right.
shit. But there is, like, there is some real hardcore, like, ideology going on. And
No, that's true.
I'll bet you a lot of
Work
Walmart
at
workers.
Target.
Yeah, right.
I saw that at Target.
And
There was some.
you saw the anti-union propaganda. You went into it.
I
but-
got shown anti-union propaganda, and I don't know why. I don't know how they could tell.
Right.
I don't know if I did have a conversation about social democracy with some like cute little. I was like 18, so I was still thinking in terms of like preps and jocks and punks.
Sure.
This cute little preppy blonde girl and I were talking about social democracy, and I was like surprised she was interested in that stuff.
Mhm.
And then, sure as shit, her and I were sitting in the anti-union propaganda fucking video, and we weren't even talking about unions.
Damn communist synthesizers. Damn communist synthesizers. But,
Fellow
like,
travelers.
yes.
But there was also these guys who were just workers there who were like, this was during the Bush era, who were like super into like defending neoconservatism and like, you know, I remember having conversations about like how they think that like Rise Against new music video about global warming was bullshit, and they like the one better where they're running around like breaking shit and spray painting walls. And
With respect to the class content of Rise Against, like, I guess what I'm saying is more their attitudes towards unionization.
yeah, well, unionization and loyalty, they were bootlickers to the employers, the management as well.
Okay, there we go. That's it. That's the relevance.
Yeah, but Rise Against, baby.
For Rise Against. You know, they didn't even like The Art of Drowning. That's hard right to me. Anyway.
I just said, who the hell is Rise Against? And I typed in, I thought you said Rise Again, and I put into Google search and I got all this Christian
Yikes.
Oh,
Rise
no.
Again stuff.
I
was
would think like
what?
Confederate South
What's
shit.
Sophie
Yeah.
talking about? Yeah, all right,
It's a punk band from the 20
Rise
years ago.
Against.
Fine.
Yeah.
Didn't they get back together recently?
Probably.
Is an American punk rock band.
not relevant, I guess,
I'm not
a
a huge
conversation.
Rise Against fan.
Well, I think
They
it's
have- they're
extremely
seventh-
important for the periodization of capitalism, which Rise Against album is how.
You know, that conversation was just so sensational.
You could do that with KRS One albums too, apparently.
I could get with that actually. All right.
They released their ninth album last year called The Nowhere Generation.
All right. Still kicking. Nice work, Rise
Still
Against.
kicking.
No future,
As we
more
keep
like
going.
decades of future. I think I finished the slide. Oh, okay, here we go. People answer the question, what do you do? By naming an occupation. None of this is true for big classes, although they do respond with their class if they are asked that question. The big classes, and that's
Sorry,
a parenthetical.
that's just
I'm
me.
guessing that's from
that's
Tom,
me. Yeah.
You know, in the United States, that's you know,
But
it's
people
a real
were-
crapshoot whether someone is like super woke on property relations. And
Well,
by
I was
woke,
also
I mean
gonna-
Marxist.
I was also going to say, like in North America, people, I don't know what it's like in Ireland, but like there's a lot of studies done on this. People massively misidentify their class position, not even in a Marxist sense, but even in a kind of like, sort of more like liberal or kind of mainstream sense of like, where are you in the income distribution? Like wealthier, like upper middle class people, everyone thinks they're middle class because like middle class is like is a floating signifier of extreme ideological importance in North American politics. So it's like people who are actually like working class, or if you want to base it on like a kind of non-Marxist income, like lower class, they think they're middle class. And then unless you are like utter, like just like staggeringly wealthy, all these people who are actually like the top 1 to 5% of income distribution think they're middle class, right? Like everyone is middle class, and like yeah, like one of the wildest things about Sanders, right, was that in the States was that like he was actually talking about the working class, and no one had talked about that in American politics for 40 years.
Right. I mean, including Bernie Sanders for like 20 years, like
that's right.
Started saying the middle class instead of the working class, and
that's right.
Yeah, be a Democratic senator. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, another interesting kind of foundational story is like when my family moved up a little bit in income distribution, I had a friend who was like a little bit poorer than me, and like he thought of himself as, because we were having this conversation and like you could see the differences in our homes and in our lifestyles, only then did he describe himself and his family as lower middle class. And I describe myself as middle class.
Right, because if you're the benchmark for middle.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think Tom maybe in a place with kind of more Marxist-inspired history like Ireland, that there might be better diffuse like class understandings, even like English, like a lot of places in the English like Commonwealth, like former British Empire, like have a much clearer a view of class relations.
That's true. That is true.
We never had a. But I think this doesn't go for Canada, but in the U.S. we didn't even really have a Labor Party to speak of.
Yep. And I'll also say, scarily enough,
Sorry, I was going to say, but I think more kind of fundamentally, like if we think that the point that being made here is like, what do you do? Like that, you wouldn't expect somebody to say I'm a working class by that. It's like the wrong question. Like I know that's a kind of pernickety thing, but I know what you mean. On top of it, like in America, there is no working class. There's only middle class, and that's everybody. You cannot ideologically use the word working class.
And in Canada, the right populists who are like taking over the Conservative Party, interesting enough, they have been the ones. So like, and this is another example of how it's like trying to understand of like the temporality of these sorts of claims, right? Like in what particular moments in a capitalism under a particular regime in a particular place is one aspect of the analysis more salient than the other, right? Because like now that everything is in crisis in Canada, the right populists are talking about the working class. Right, and it's actually like the Liberal Party that wants to keep talking about the middle class because they see the middle class as like their basis of support. So it's like, it's the far right people who like came up, interesting enough, under like Koch brother funded Canadian think tanks who are like now out there talking about like how they're going to like help the working class. Now they're going to help the working class is like deregulate crypto and and defund the welfare state, right? Like
because it's a crypto nationalist dog whistle, and unfortunately, like class politics in the 20th century like slides into this reactionary form that they can recall much easier than communists.
There's a similar trend in the U.S. as well. It's a little bit more diffuse and kind of bong rip with the role that QAnon plays here, and like the kind of like populist takeover is Trump, and Trump is just a user.
Yeah, but I would say like earlier, like in the 90s or something, if anyone was talking about workers, they were comparing it to like welfare state, like people that were benefiting from the welfare state and trying to attack those parasites. They weren't saying it, in quotes, they weren't using that worker's identity to attack the bourgeoisie.
Which is why
that's also like
into it, right?
That's also kind of like the redneck revolt thing that we were trying to do, is that you saw a lot of there's kind of this like thin slice of like lower, using income distribution kind of lingo, like lower middle class, kind of like skilled workers, people who are like mechanics and service workers, like people who service like machinery and stuff like that, who tend to cut kind of right, actually, because they see themselves as being threatened by taxes and welfare recipients as taking up resources that they're trying desperately to hold on to. whereas people who are lower than them only benefit from these kinds of services. So,
yeah, and Redneck Revolt was an anti-fascist group you were part of that practiced this differentiated appeal,
right, and
of this anti-fascist like.
So we would go to like gun shows, and you would see people who are probably genuinely like working class, throwing in with these petite bourgeois people about Hillary Clinton is an evil cunt or whatever kind of discourse, that we actually kind of agreed with them on, but also like so is the right wing candidate you favor as well. Anyway, it just made me think of that.
Cunts, a lot of them.
Yeah, agreed.
Cunts all the way down.
That's enough.
Cunts to the left of me, cunts to the right. Here I am. Okay,
let's
keep going,
over again. You're a cunt. You're a cunt. No.
This is not suitable for children.
This is how working class we are. We're allowed to say cunt here. That's how it is.
I am.
It's only working class elsewhere, babe. Like, who says cunt here?
Me.
Well, besides you.
I've heard other workers say that.
Okay. I believe you.
Yeah. Maybe one
Esri.
of them.
Yes.
Do you want to keep going?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Did your parenthetical turn out to be too controversial for our cultural context?
It did.
So I'm going to just go ahead and endorse that there's an empirical resonance that occupation has that the big classes don't. In times when I guess there isn't like tumult over the food supply or something.
Yeah.
But like 1968 in France, there was no tumult over food supply, so it's not necessarily just food supply.
No, you're right, but there was a government that rose and fell in like living memory that was beholden to the Nazis, and then a bunch of them were rehabilitated. Like there was a lot of reasons. In that case, it wasn't like famine; it was more like political instability and war that set that up. Like the French government was like falling every couple decades. You know what I mean?
Was it? Was de Gaulle not? Oh, I suppose. Okay, sorry. I thought. Okay. Yeah.
Well, there's the Vichy regime, and
no, I thought you were talking about but de Gaulle was quite stable in his power, though. Like wasn't he not?
He
was
stable enough
to.
Yeah, well, he was stable enough to withstand May '68, but he fled. You know what I mean? There was a point where it looked like that wasn't the case. So I guess to change my thesis a little bit, it's not just hunger, but it's any of the violent destabilizers, war,
or say like the end of like it can be political crisis too, like say
it can be political
Portuguese
crisis,
Portuguese Revolution.
I guess
Revolution. I think
I'm borrowing some analysis. I'm borrowing some analysis from a book called The Great Leveler that talks about reduction of social inequality being tied to big violent events like famines, pestilence, like diseases, revolutions, or wars. That's where I'm coming from here. But yeah, just to reform my thoughts. Yes, it can be political instability that brings people there.
But I mean, I think while you bring up a good point, Esri, I think also the point that Tom brings up with that parenthetical is somewhat fair. It's like it's a basic research methods kind of point, or like critique of research methods. Like, what kind of question are you asking is going to determine what kind of answer you get.
And doesn't Eric Olin Wright know it?
Yeah,
his middle period is all sort of like developing a concept of class that's sort of like a 9 location grid, and then doing all this empirical research on it and he does broadly think that there are like political correlates to class relation understood in a Marxist way. They're sort of weak.
Well, I think also, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that parenthetical is taking aim at Grusky and Whedon and not Wright.
Yeah, but I think Wright is trying.
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
That's
sure.
That's what I meant by it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, any Marxist can say, the empirical resonance of the class is not, and what resonates with the class as people is not necessarily their world historical interests hovering above them in some sense. Like, that's just a basic Marxist problem, I suppose. Like, we're never going to be completely satisfied by an appeal to what what people in the class think. But I don't know. I'll defend this interest in people that you're trying to aggregate and what they think. Like, from a sociological perspective, it's like, that's,
I may not agree with your
conscious
class interest, but I will fight to the right to death for you to have it.
If you don't incorporate people's actual thoughts into your theory of class consciousness, you're just doing some totalitarian Hegelian game.
I know. I agree. I think just taking this at face value, like, Grusky and Whedon would get an answer that's more class based if they asked, what class do you identify with, instead of what do you do?
Yeah.
So
and but yeah, I guess.
But I agree with what you're saying.
The general sort of social relevance. What class do you come from is not a question I hear, like, between just people. And what do you do is something I hear all the time.
That's true.
Unless you're in college and somebody say, what class did you come from? Say, I came from the class that's down the corridor. 1A, class 1A. I'm going to class 2C now.
Unless you're a weirdo like me, you'd be like, oh, I guess I'm working class and I was middle class. People are like, what?
Yeah.
Right. I do think Tom has a point too, that people know how to answer that question, right? Even if they, as I said, they often misidentify where they where they actually are. Like, people, it's not like people aren't aware of that, right? Like, it's not like that people aren't aware that there's like something called middle class and working class and upper class, and now people talk about the 1%, right? Like, and the right, they talk about globalists and so on, which like often means like the Jews, but also has a class dimension, right? And so it's like it's not that people don't. It's not that people aren't actually invested in their sense of where they are in a class hierarchy. Because I think, broadly speaking, they very much are, right? They don't just think of themselves as within an occupation. They're very, and the idea of becoming a middle class or maintaining a middle class status continues to have an extreme level of ideological salience that exceeds what the kind of shade that Grusky and Whedon are throwing, as though it's like only sociologists that think about class. I mean, that's come on, that's horseshit, right? Like, even the most basic just interaction with people outside of academia demonstrates that's not true.
Sure, but people are often correct about their professional interests because it stems from their everyday life experience and what it means to butter their bread, and they're usually fucking wrong about their long-term class interests.
That's correct.
Like,
yes.
In a way that Marxists will be like, actually, I've derived the perfect formula from German metaphysics to actually explain to you your real class. Like, there's a whole different dynamic because class is just a remote abstraction from those real life, the real thing you're doing, and that's what makes it just consciously follow less from sensuous activity as Marx imagined. Like, when you're seeing a workers' movement pop up as Marx was, it was kind of easy to think, well, shit, these huge determinants of life chances, that's going to be the huge determinant of consciousness. That's a nice, clear theory. Like,
and it makes sense for its time.
It makes sense for its time. It has faith in human reason to kind of deduce their the better angels of their nature, in a sense, to not just go in with their basest short-term interests, but to have a more expansive view of their interests. And Marx is maybe a little optimistic.
Well, I think the damning thing that happened was that the state clamped down on the workers' movement and the worker, and in America, it was made illegal to be a communist or an anarchist in the union. Like, and I don't think that changed. Yeah. So anyway, now that we've gone off about this parentheses 5 times, maybe we should do the thing.
I just have one comment from Guillermo in the chat that the Portuguese Revolution was because of a colonial war, and then he says among the other factors, but it was the trigger. Yeah, so it's like it's kind of like war was definitely in the mix
Yeah.
there. Yeah, it was like
Chalk-
Mozambique,
chalk one
wasn't it?
up.
Yeah.
Chalk one up for the Great Leveler.
Was it Mozambique? Was it, or was it Angola? Is it Angola or Mozambique? Was the war?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I
okay.
don't know about Portuguese imperialism.
I know one thing they did. The Portuguese did. Listen to how scummy this is. In I think it was Mozambique when they left. As a punishment, what they did, they filled the sewers full of concrete in the capital city.
Oh God.
Oh.
Yeah, I heard that now. So somebody can
Animals.
correct me if I'm wrong about that. But yeah, I did. I have read that somewhere. That's pretty
It's
grim.
fucking revolting. Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah. All right. So now that we've solved class versus occupation and its empirical resonance, we can move on. The big classes remain analytical abstractions created by the theoretical reasoning of analysts rather than the categories that are formally institutionalized in the protocols of organizations and the everyday practices and understanding of real people. Okay. They argue that disaggregated occupations constitute the real boundaries of locations within production that have sufficient internal homogeneity to generate the outcomes of interest to class analysis. Quote, occupations act collectively on behalf of their members, extract rent and exploit non-members, shape life chances and lifestyles, and otherwise behave precisely as class theorists have long thought aggregate classes should. Using their definition, there are perhaps thousands of microclasses in a large complex society. In their research, they differentiated 126 occupations, that number limited by the data that they were using. They even suggested that academic sociologists and economists constitute two different microclasses.
So
Agreed.
one thing, like, we did just read the Brumaire, like God knows how long ago. Is it 2 years ago we finished reading the Brumaire, or a year ago?
Was it really? Don't say it's to you. Jesus, Tom.
Well, what did we do? We've done another one since the Brumaire. Didn't we do something in between the Brumaire and this?
You did the Fundamental Principles series, but I think...
Oh, maybe that was it. Maybe
we
the Brumaire was the last one. Yeah. So, like, but in the Brumaire, like, Marx talks, that where he talks about, like, the people acting as their, like, big class and then going, like, fuck this, lads, and essentially devolving into their micro classes.
Yeah. There's kind of like game theory problem there where you're like abandoning your big coalition.
Right, yeah. You're going to go, this shit's not going to work this time. Yeah, fuck it. And people make rational choices to act as the micro classes. Like Marx describes all the, he doesn't just, that's the thing. Like, I find this is so congruent in the good sense that E.O. Wright manages to construct it. I find it very congruent with like a Marxist class analysis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it totally is. Well, and like putting it in that like game metaphor kind of terminology,
Mm-hmm.
like, when you're fighting, when at one point you're fighting like, well, this capitalist game we're playing is like so fucked up and unfair. Let's play this communist game or the socialist game instead. That's way better. When you keep trying to change the game and you fail, then you move to the micro classes eventually and be like, fuck it, I'm just gonna try to win at the game we have instead, or focus on the moves I can make within this game because I can't fucking change the shit.
And maybe to be optimistic.
It's literally what we do when we're talking in this podcast all the time. We say, "Oh, wait for the workers' movement to rise." Yeah. So what the fuck can we do in the meantime? Talk some theory bullshit.
To be optimistic about this microclass analysis or something, like workers acting rationally within their own situation, not assuming that everything is going to change, but just kind of trying to act in their own best interests would be something of like a welcome improvement to workers just getting fleeced on an individual level. I have a friend who is in like middle management, not exactly a worker, but over the years, in the beginning of the pandemic, he was very grateful for his job. At the end of the pandemic, he was like, man, fuck this job. Like, jobs are bullshit. Capitalism's destroying the world. Like, ended up having this sort of sea change, and that was sort of pretty painful for him because it was at odds with what he had to do for his everyday life experience. Anyway, I suppose my overall point is that like there's an old Marxist theory that goes something like this. If you can get like worker struggles to adopt kind of self-interested rationality towards their group on a job site, then you can get workers to struggle for a self-interested change in the rule set of the game, and then eventually you can get workers to self-interestedly change the game. And that there's some sort of scaling up from the shorter-term rationality to the longer-term rationality, that workers have to be practiced in battle through some kind of workers' movement in order to scale up to being able to change the game. Now, I don't know whether to endorse this model or not, but to be more optimistic, perhaps teleological, maybe if you believe in workers' rationality to enact communism, you start from, where are the sectors of workers and what occupations do they have that give them, X and Y, like kind of outlooks on things. And this could be the basis for the differentiated appeals that you need to, help those workers realize their interests. Like
right.
even on the moves of the game level that we find a lot less inspiring than changes in the rules of the game or changes in the game overall.
Well, let's take this with a real world example that's happening right now. Like yet another Amazon factory was recently unionized. That is still focusing on the moves that you can make within the rules of the game as it currently exists. But that, like having workers see their collective self-interest in the moves they can make within the game is a starting point that is refreshing and exciting, actually.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. Like, the stuff like about, say, what's that? Is it, what's the coffee shop that's really
Starbucks.
Right,
there's
Starbucks.
So like, Tempe, there's one.
Yeah, so like, like you have this dynamic where the biggest, hardest thing to do is to get the first Starbucks unionized, and it'll generally fail, and then it succeeds. And then people will go, oh, wait a second, lads, there's something here. And then the next one mightn't fail as many times. And then you get this like cascading effect where you have like now hundreds and hundreds. And every time it goes up to vote, they're winning like 24-1 and 17-3. And it's like, sometimes it's literally example. It's literally like sacrifice an example that allows people to shift how they act in the rules in their micro classes. And I think it's an impossibility for any type of a communist horizon without a working movement, whether the movement that we have that'll come out of this one has any revolutionary elements or not. Like it's just a tautology that you can't go from capitalism to communism without like workers realizing their power at any point prior to this.
There is a possibility of getting too hung up on making moves within the game.
Right.
Or there's a possibility of getting too hung up on changing the rules of the game and never making it, beyond those levels, let's say. But, it's like it's like a defense mechanism. It's something that helps you for a certain period of time. It builds you up to a certain point, and then you have to kind of move on. You have to move towards something else. The moves that you can make in the game are a good place to start for defending yourself and are a necessary beginning. Well, but you don't want to end there.
Let's think strategically too. Like, what is the next logical move on the next level, right? The next level of changing the rules of the game. What are the rules of the game that prevented people from being able to challenge the game itself? That those labor bills that I was talking about that made it illegal to be a communist or an anarchist in a union.
Or just to do
changing that
kind of radical unionism with solidarity strikes and that sort of thing.
Right. Like what can you do to change the rules to make it easier to challenge the game itself?
So what was that act passed in? Was it the 30s or whatnot in the States?
Taft-Hartley,
yeah.
Not the Wagner Act.
Was it Taft-Hartley Act?
I'm thinking of Taft-Hartley is a big one that
which is the one that
I think that's the one that
criminalized the general strike.
So 1947, I think this is the one. Let's see.
You're talking about ones.
Yeah. This is
Bob from.
Okay, so let's see. The Taft-Hartley Act amended the 1935 National Labor Relations Act, prohibiting unions
That's
from
the
engaging in
Wagner
several unfair. Okay, so that's the Wagner Act. Unfair labor practices. Among the practices prohibited by the Taft-Hartley are jurisdictional strikes, wildcat strikes, solidarity or political strikes, secondary boycotts, secondary mass picketing, closed shops, and monetary donations by unions to federal political campaigns. And so the Wagner Act might let's see.
Yeah, the Wagner Act was the National Labor Relations Act. Yeah, you're right. You're totally right. So Taft-Hartley is what I was thinking of, which was an attempt to defang Wagner, right? Because that essentially makes like general strikes more or less criminalized, right?
Yeah, general strikes, even just solidarity strikes.
Solidarity strikes, wildcat strikes. Yeah.
Solidarity strikes are illegal everywhere, nearly. They're illegal everywhere in capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
so that's
in
like
England,
so those are
solidarity strikes are legal. But like the thing is, solidarity strikes are illegal until there are solidarity strikes, and then no one can do a fucking thing about it.
Yeah, but
it's ultimately it's something to hold over labor union leaders to be like, oh, you can't do this, and they're like, yeah, I guess we can't. Whereas when they do it anyway, like they're not going to arrest every union member out there.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, but it's probably a great example of something of like where it's like you might start off having a very sectoral interest in improving your moves within the game, which could ultimately lead you to pursue the like changing the rules of the game in the sense of like, oh yeah, that's not a very good act. But if you were to challenge that act, right, in a serious way, it would necessarily alter your capacity to at least think about changing the game itself, right? It would be very hard to have that type of radical revolutionary activity with those rules in place, right? So there is an interesting series of
move the laws. Because the progressive movement, whatever the progressive movement, I call it a movement, but it's not the classical progressive movement, just a sort of disparate, progressive blogosphere that was around the 2000s. The Taft-Hartley Act was something on a lot of people's minds because in a way, okay, this is what holds back organized labor. God, the golden age of the New Deal was all built on organized labor. Maybe if we lobby hard enough to Congress, we can overturn the Taft-Hartley Act or something. And as it turns out, without something like independent workers' power, it appears to be completely fucking impossible.
Yeah, and I don't even go further. Like the thing that will actually get rid of it won't be probably political reform. It will be kind of semi-revolutionary behavior. Like I've just been reading like Rosa Luxemburg on the mass strike in Russia, and you just see like what happened. They, unions were illegal, and they just literally went everywhere in like these lightning spreading, and there was just like mass strikes and like all this stuff, and they got all the union laws pretty much fucking changed for a while. Like that's the kind of way that in reality worker power will I think will probably manifest itself, and not a load of progressive bloggers fucking saying, oh, we'll get rid of the Taft-Hartley Act. You know what I mean?
Right.
But what if Ezra Klein produces a very solid data-driven analysis? Like I'm talking, he's got charts, he's got graphs.
Ooh, what nuance.
Yeah. And it works for management too, if you think about it.
Mm-hmm. No, that's what that's for. Like, and the idea that we can, even, many Marxists are guilty of this, that we can just, manage our way to a new union movement. Like, there has to be, the game theorists, there's a sort of controversy in game theory about this very idea, is they assume something called common knowledge of rationality, where all actors are aware of the instrumental, economic, sociopathic rationality that they're supposed to follow. And that is a quote ideal that is almost never met on the shop floor. And if you could get, workers to have this common knowledge of so-called rationality, this economic, sociopathic rationality by which capitalism operates, it would improve. I don't know. Maybe I'm excessively naive. Maybe I'm idealist, but I think it would improve the quality of worker struggles in a just basic game theoretical way. Of that assumption would then be met, and people could take moves with their interests, like insight in in the way that, robot Marxists kind of wish they would, at least on the very least on the level of their everyday lives. I think you were going to say, Bob, at some point that the moves that people actually have available in their lives are the moves within the game. It's the only thing you can really think through as an individual and try to carry out. Everything else requires a level of cooperation that you may or may not be able to secure.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think there might be conditions under which that level of collective cooperation is easier to develop institutionally, like socially. But I also suspect that moves within the game might play a role in might be a necessary role, like a necessary step. Like you can't get to that second level of activity from nowhere, right? Like from abstract void of analysis, right? Like,
I mean, getting to change the rules of the game at this point feels about on the same level as changing the game in terms of, our prospects for doing so. Look at the complete dearth of options the mainstream Democratic Party has for,
wait,
protecting abortion rights or something, right?
Wait now. Imagine
mechanism.
How big would the squad have to be, Esri, to get them to pass Taft-Hartley?
Or at least twice as big.
But I mean, even if you had everybody that was like the squad in power, not in power, but in the Democratic Party, and there was 300 of them, half of them wouldn't vote for it.
Well, yeah, right. Yeah, because there's no. It's very hard to imagine a path there that doesn't rely on some kind of, institutional workers' power, or at least some kind of very live, sudden revolutionary threat coming from, either the left or some kind of terrifying populist thing that steals the socialist appeal for ultranationalism. It's almost impossible to see any concessions. This is why I stopped being a liberal.
Right. I think
reading reclined blogs.
Okay. I think that's a pretty good place to stop. We just hit 2 hours, and we did about 6 slides today. I thought we did the whole fucking chapter. I thought
how many slides were there?
Is there really anything left? I mean,
there is. Look at all this shit.
Oh my god!
Oh my god!
Loads of shit.
Oh wow!
Seriously.
We didn't actually talk about a bunch of it. Okay. Well, I mean, we did talk. We went over it, but not in detail, and we'll go over it in detail another time.
We just talked for half an hour about the question that they asked and the answer. So you know how we do it. You know how we roll. Content creation. You know what I mean? Content creation.
That's right.
Okay, everybody, let's go to the chat and see who we can say thanks to for turning up. We got Fugot, Alex Marquez, Lorenzo Marconi, Oswald Spengler, Alias.
What up, Wayne Grusky?
Wayne Slutsky, Guillermo Marquez, Zachary Smith. I just want to note out that in the last slide we were doing here, they did actually bring up homogeneity, again, the global homo. What is it about EO Right and the global homo?
Well, you know how they are. They're just social democracy is only different from fascism by quantity, not quality. So it just pops out somewhere. No, I don't know. There's only one analytical Marxist that's working today that I think has really slid in the reactionary camp. They're not part of the original kind of wave.
Who's that?
Vivek Chibber. We can talk about that off air if you want.
Has he gone full reactionary, that guy?
Are you familiar with Compact magazine?
Oh, that's right. I heard he joined that ridiculous magazine. Yeah, that's too bad. I heard Chibber talk once, and I enjoyed it. I thought I would just read a bunch of stuff. I didn't know he had joined that magazine, which is a shame.
Well, Chibber has a strong background in analytical Marxism, which means he knows that the revealed course of union activity in the 20th century adopted a xenophobic class compact. Compact magazine. Interesting.
It's not crazy.
It's not crazy.
In fact, it's surprising that more analytical Marxists haven't thrown in with that shit.
Well, because analytical Marxists usually believe in something called ethics, which most communists don't. maybe it has something to do with that. Maybe it doesn't. But like, if you have communist commitments, it's a terrible place to go.
Ethics? You mean that thing that Mark said was bullshit?
Yes, that's the one.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I don't believe in that.
Yeah, that's stupid. Anyway, Class Compact Magazine.
Available in iTunes.
Cut that shit. I'm hating on it, but it's a way of promoting it by accident.
Yeah.
So
let's
fuck
take
that.
let's take
Take
it
off
offline.
the air.
Yeah. Okay. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.